now sitting.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honour.
Ms Ward.
Your Honour, today is the opening of the North Black Range Pallaran bushfire inquiry. Is Your Honour content for me to go straight into opening submissions?
Yes, thank you. I understand Mr Newton's appearing.
That's correct, Your Honour, on behalf of the Rural Fire Service, National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales.
Thank you, Mr Newton.
Your Honour, these are the opening submissions for the Coronial inquiry into the cause and origin of the North Black Range Pallaran bushfire. The name comes from the fire trail close to the suspected area of origin for the fire. This fire burnt in the Queanbeyan Pallaran local government area, encompassed within the lands of the Ngurrago, Ngambri and Ngunnawal people. It burned for approximately 2 months and damaged an area of approximately 40,000 hectares within the Talaganda National Park and beyond. At least 30 structures, including 4 homes, were destroyed or damaged in connection with the fire. Pasture was lost, fencing was destroyed, flora and fauna died. Fortunately, no loss of human life ensued. Your Honour, given that the scope of issues to be considered today is limited to the cause and origin of the North Black Range fire, the court will hear oral evidence from 3 witnesses only, being the officer in charge of the investigation and 2 fire investigators. In addition to this oral evidence, the court will have the benefit of witness statements from some people directly involved in the fire. Some statements come from Rural Fire Service and National Parks and Wildlife Service crews involved in early attempts at fire suppression. Other evidence comes from local residents with long experience of their own in fighting fires on their country and who made significant individual efforts to protect their own homes and livelihoods during the fire. And some of the evidence comes from people who are both members of the local RFS and members of the local community, because it is important to remember that at a brigade level at least, the RFS is staffed with local volunteers working to protect their own community. These statements tell small but important stories on an individual scale, which will serve to represent a much bigger human drama. So, for example, for this fire, there are references within the brief to the way that local community radio was used to help people try and keep up to date with what was happening in their region. And there are references to local volunteers and pubs, local pubs, mucking in to help feed firefighting crews. These statements provide some insight into how events unfolded and the questions that remain as to why the fire developed in the way that it did. As with the other hearings this month, Your Honour, I'm raising this now because the court will not today traverse evidence about the adequacy of the response to the fire by individuals or by firefighting agencies. Once the court has completed a consideration of the cause and origin for this fire, along with other fires across the state of New South Wales over the 2019-2020 bushfire season, the court will review the evidence and the issues raised in each matter and determine which issues will proceed to further and more detailed consideration via a representative case study. The hearing into representative case studies will occur here at the Coroners Court in Lidcombe, commencing 5 September 2022. Anyone who seeks more details can watch the opening submissions made by Counsel Assisting Your Honour on the 25th of August of this year. Those links to those submissions are available on the Coroners Court of New South Wales website. A fire starts. The North Black Range Pallaran fire is believed to have commenced on 25 November 2019 as a result of a lightning strike in the Talaganda National Park, west of the township of Braidwood. A range of investigatory techniques, including but not limited to analysis of lightning strike data, eyewitness reports of a dry thunderstorm in the area the previous evening, 25 November, and later site inspections conducted by both the Rural Fire Service and the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command of the New South Wales Police Force point to the fire commencing along the North Black Range Fire Trail, close to the Maloon Fire Trail. I note that the Currowan fire to the east is also believed to have commenced as a result of lightning strike on the same night. And although these two fires did not merge, firefighting efforts on one fire necessarily meant that resources were not available to respond to the other fire. Your Honour will receive evidence establishing that the North Black Range of the Talaganda National Park forms part of the Great Dividing Range, with native vegetation being mainly a mix of dry and wet sclerophyll forests, with areas of woodland, subalpine forests, swamp forests, montane heath and bogs. The remoteness of the likely area of origin is depicted in the following photographs. Your Honour can see here from page 5 of the Coronial brief, two maps showing the general area of ignition contained within a black circle, and then the township of Braidwood, marked over to the right. When one then moves to the details contained at page 6 of the Coronial brief, Your Honour can see the North Black Range Fire Trail with the point of origin marked with the red icon, and Your Honour can also see the surrounding country. These images go some way to explaining how a lightning strike on 25 November 2019 might generate a fire which was not observed by humans until the morning of 26 November 2019. The first person to call in a fire to the region of Pallaran was from Melbourne Air Traffic Control, who in turn had been contacted by a pilot on a commercial aircraft reporting fire or smoke in the Mount Pallaran area. This call occurred at 10:52 on the morning of 26 November. Calls from local residents did follow, but some hours later, with calls from Bombay coming in at around 15:40 and 15:59 on the afternoon of 26 November. The National Parks and Wildlife Service had personnel deployed within the park even prior to the first calls being received at 000. Louis Turner had been tasked to investigate possible fire sites on the morning of 26 November 2019 in light of the lightning strokes that had been observed the previous night. Upon arrival at the park, Louis Turner met some people on trail bikes who reported seeing smoke in the distance. An RFS crew from Braidwood met up with Louis Turner within the National Park. They had been dispatched to a possible fire after the first 000 call from Melbourne Air Traffic Control had been received. According to Louis, when he arrived at the scene of the fire, the flame height was already established at around 3 to 4 metres. According to Scott Hart, the captain of the Braidwood Rural Fire Service Brigade, fire behaviour was extremely erratic from the get-go, up to 4 metre flame height, spreading in all directions under variable winds. We attempted to get hose lines around the fire, but it was too dangerous as the bush was too thick and the fire too deep into the scrub to achieve much. Scott Hart requested air support and heavy plant as the fire was too large to fight with only ground crews. He was told there was no air support available and that heavy plant would arrive later. Direct attack was attempted by a mix of RFS and National Parks and Wildlife Service crews, but given terrain and fuel load, this was not successful and put crews at some risk. So, for instance, within the brief, Your Honour will receive a statement from Edward Smigelski. I apologise if I've mispronounced his name. He is the Senior Deputy Captain of the Hoskington Rossi Brigade within the Lake George District. He tells the court in his statement that the type, amount and structure of the very dry fuel caused it to reignite behind us in less than a minute as he and his crew attempted direct attack and tried to reach the head of the fire. Edward says he had to use a crew member to control reignition behind him to secure an escape route while he continued along the southern flank of the fire. This occurred after he had decided it was not safe to escape by going into the black or standing on ground that was already burnt, because burning trees were falling within this area due to the strong winds. Your Honour will receive some evidence about wind strength across that afternoon and evening. The fire was not suppressed even with the use of heavy plant and dozers used to try and establish containment lines later on 26 November. The court will now see from photographs within page 28 and 29 of the brief the type of fuel load present at the scene where the fire was first established. Your Honour can see to the right-hand side of that photo, partly obscured by one of the grid markings, one of the RFS early responder crews trying to suppress the fire. The first fire spread map is contained within the brief at page 35 and now showing on the screen. This shows the fire moving in a general easterly direction, but with some backing fire that spread to the west of the North Black Range Fire Trail. A line scan taken at 12:52 on 27 November 2019, that is the day after the fire was first observed, and set out at page 41 of the brief, shows the spread of the fire through the national park. Then, if the court looks to the line scan at page 43, taken at 17:52 that day, one can see the proximity of the North Black Range fire on the left to the fire already running at Carawan on the right. Lightning activity returned on 28 November 2019, and a second ignition within the Talaganda National Park was recorded that day about 5 kilometres southeast from the first fire. The North Black Range fire then took a significant run in an easterly direction on 29 November 2019. Residential properties were ultimately lost in Bombay to the east and in Maloon and Wari to the north and northeast. Numerous other outbuildings were destroyed. The final fire progression map is contained at page 120 of the brief and is now showing in court. This illustrates the eventual reach of the fire and the proximity to Braidwood, which Your Honour can see on the right-hand side and towards the middle of the page. Moving then to the investigation into cause and origin. The investigation into the cause and origin of the North Black Range Pallaran fire has been undertaken by Rural Fire Service Fire Investigator Stephen May and Mark Holland, a Senior Crime Scene Officer with the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command of New South Wales Police. Each of the fire scene investigators conducted independent reviews, although Senior Crime Scene Officer Holland had the information available to him from Fire Investigator May's investigation report. They reached a general consensus as to the likely cause and origin of the fire. I say general consensus because Mark Hollands physically inspected the site some 2 months after Stephen May conducted his investigation. Hence, Senior Crime Scene Officer Hollands notes in his report that the fire continued burning in the suspected area of origin and within containment lines for a number of weeks following the original ignition. It follows the fire may have moved through the area of origin on more than one occasion, obviously hampering attempts to interpret indicators of ignition and preliminary fire spread by the time he was able to visit the site. In addition, the time that had elapsed between the ignition of the fire and the time of the Hollands examination could itself result in changes to the appearance of fire indicators and patterns. So not just the active fire, but the passage of time and the effect of rain and other weather events in the intervening weeks. The court will shortly receive into evidence the expert opinion of Stephen May. He first observed the scene of the North Black Range fire from the air on 5 December 2019. A specific area of origin for the fire could not be determined. The scene of the second ignition within the National Park, 5 kilometres to the southeast and first reported on 28 November, was examined from the air, and May was able to confirm a tree lightning strike at grid reference 55H 357764. No further investigation of this later ignition was required. Stephen May needed to complete an on-site investigation to determine the cause and origin of the original fire that had been first observed on 26 November. Obviously, this needed to happen when it was safe for him to enter the National Park. This finally happened on 16 November 2019, with a further investigation of the scene on 19 December. The court will hear from Fire Investigator May this morning about the fire spread indicators he observed at the scene and his hypothesis that the fire was caused by lightning. At page 186 of the brief and presently displayed in court, one can see a photograph taken during this investigation that Stephen May suggests is a disturbance to the natural earth and raising of the earth's surface, likely caused by lightning strike to the ground. This is corroborated by lightning strike data, which May plotted onto a map contained at page 197 of the brief. Your Honour, as discussed, Mark Hollands conducted his physical examination at the site on 25 February 2020. He firstly met with Louis Turner, the National Parks and Wildlife Service officer, who first observed the fire on the ground, and he then travelled to the GPS coordinates for the fire as first reported. Mark Hollands observed macro fire indicators as recorded in the photo at page 111. Your Honour, it doesn't mean much to me, that photograph, but Your Honour will have the benefit of hearing from Mr. Hollands this morning so that the macro fire indicators can be explained. But again, because of the passage of time, he was unable to rely upon potential micro indicators at the scene. Mark Hollands concluded the fire originated within an area of origin located near the North Black Range fire trail, near where the fire was first sighted by Louis Turner. But a definitive point of origin was unable to be established because of the period of time between the fire and his inspection. The fire extinguished. The court will receive within the brief of evidence some material with conflicting dates as to when the North Black Range Pallaran fire was listed as out. Some documents record the fire as out on 23 December or 31 December, but clearly the fire continued to burn after these dates as recorded in the fire progression map. It seems the documents recording the North Black Range Pallaran fire as out by December 2019 are a result of administrative error when the fire was inadvertently merged with the Charlie's Forest fire in the RFS fire icon system. Numerous other documents within the brief, such as the fire progression maps, the situation report, and the RFS incident controller report, plus eyewitness accounts, confirm that the fire continued to burn into the new year. The North Black Range Pallaran fire was listed as out on 28 January 2020. Your Honour, I'll now tender the North Black Range Pallaran brief, which we understand should be marked Exhibit 23A.
Yes, thank you.
Your Honour, I call the first witness, Detective Senior Constable Ben Waldron.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Have a seat. Thank you, Detective.
Would you state your full name, rank and station?
Ben Waldron. I'm a Detective Senior Constable currently attached to the Arson Unit at State Crime Command.
And are you the officer in charge of the Coronial investigation into the North Black Range fire?
Yes, I am.
In that capacity, have you prepared a statement dated 27 August 2020?
That's correct.
Are there some corrections you wish to make to that statement?
Yes, there is.
All right, can we go to the first, please?
On page 3 of the brief, which is paragraph number 5, there's a typo. It should be 35 structures, not 36.
All right, so an amendment to the first sentence, first line.
That's correct.
And the next correction?
Is on the red page 69, which is a table from RFS in relation to the lightning strike data.
All right, so image 6.8.
That's correct.
Yes.
The RFS have changed the time to Eastern Standard, not daylight savings time. It should have been changed to daylight savings time. So there's been an hour added to the second column, being the stroke date and time.
So by way of example, the first entry that presently reads ID number 4054722361 has a stroke date of 25 November 2019, and the reference to 2007 should instead read 2107. Is that right?
That's correct.
And we should change every entry in that column.
Add an hour to every single one for daylight savings.
And the next correction?
Is on page 72.
Yes.
Paragraph 81, dot point A, I've stated that the lightning strike was recorded at 8:46. It's actually 9:46.
Is that an amendment that you make having regard to the problem with...
The RFS data, yes.
Right. We're needing to update it to include a reference to Eastern Daylight Saving Time.
That's correct.
Detective, I'm going to ask you to explain to the court or orientate the court to a map that I've just referred to in the opening. It's contained within page 5 of the brief, and it'll shortly come up on the screen. All right. Could you just confirm the red icon on the left in the top map is a representation of the general area of ignition for this fire?
That's correct.
And then you've marked to the right-hand side the location of the town of Braidwood, is that right?
That's correct.
And is the image that sits below just a magnified version,
That's correct.
zoomed in version of the other photo?
Yes, it is.
Okay. What's the approximate distance between the general area of ignition and the township of Braidwood?
The ignition point is west-northwest of about 20 kilometres.
And that's as the crow flies?
That's correct.
We know that ultimately the fire did not reach the township of Braidwood.
That's correct.
Have you some opinions as to why it is that that township might have been spared the worst of it?
It's the type of land mass around the town being open pastures.
And these were open pastures that were in the middle of drought, is that right?
That's correct.
So very little fuel available, would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Nonetheless, for the people of Braidwood, there must have been days, if not weeks, during this fire when they felt surrounded by smoke.
Yes, there was. There was the Charlie's Forest fire to the east,
Yes.
which would have been 25, 30 kilometres to the east. And then Braidwood was sort of surrounded with a run to the south of Braidwood. When you look at the progression map, you can see a finger that ran.
Yes, we'll come to that map in the course of your evidence. Could you turn up page 26 of the brief? Do you see there a reference to section 4, discovery of fire and first days?
Yes, I can.
I'm going to ask you some questions on that topic now. Firstly, who made the first 000 call notifying the presence of smoke for the fire that became known as the North Black Range fire?
It was Melbourne Airport Control Centre.
And did that call happen at about 10:54 on the morning of 26 November?
Yeah, the 000 call was at 10:52, but the log of the phone call was 10:54.
Okay, thank you. What sort of information was Melbourne able to provide about a potential location for the fire?
It was near Mount Pallaran, and it was a smoke. There was no confirmed fire at that stage. It was a smoke column.
Smoke column near Mount Pallaran. I withdraw that. National Parks and Wildlife Service already had staff in the field that day, is that right?
They were tasked, yes.
Okay, and what were they tasked to do?
Due to the weather the night before, being a lightning storm, they were out to go out to the field and observe whether there had been any fires created by that storm.
And do you know how many crews they had involved in that task?
That was just Lewis Turner.
Now, in the course of your investigation, you took a statement from Lewis Turner, or New South Wales Police took a statement from Lewis Turner, and also a video walkthrough describing what he saw and experienced on the morning of 26 November. Is that right?
That's correct.
Have you read the statement and seen that walkthrough?
Yes, I have.
Just in summary form, how was he alerted to the presence of fire or smoke?
As he's gone to enter the park, he's come across some trail bike riders who have confirmed that they've seen smoke. So he's continued on. As he's gone northeast up the North Black Range Trail, he's come across the southern side of the fire.
So he couldn't immediately see signs of the fire himself, is that right? He relies on a report from park users, and it's only when he travels a certain way along the trail that he sees signs of fire.
That's correct.
Who were the first RFS responders on the scene?
Braidwood crew with Scott Hart, if I remember correctly.
How were they notified of the smoke or fire?
So via the 000 call.
And how did they know which part of the national park to enter if the 000 intelligence was as general as a smoke column in the vicinity of Mount Pallaran?
North Black Range Trail runs south to north or north to south, whichever way you go, and it's basically the centre of the national park, and it's the easiest way to go to view a larger part, I suppose, of the park.
So the obvious route.
Yes.
Did they meet up with Lewis Turner?
Yes, they did.
And did some National Parks and Wildlife Service crews later join with the Rural Fire Service crews and attempt early fire suppression or containment?
Yes, they did.
Because these crews were able to get into the national park and identify the scene of the fire on the 26th, were you in your investigation able to fix upon an area within the wider national park that could start as a potential area of origin?
Yes, we could.
I mean, your investigation into the fire actually commenced sometime after the fire.
That's correct.
But through your investigation, do you conclude that early attempts to settle upon a cause and origin of the fire must have been assisted by these crews identifying a potential area of origin? That's
correct. When you've got a fire that's the size of 40,000 hectares, you rely on initial observations and even mapping. The first map is only an estimate generally of the fire scene from points of where the fire has been observed. It's not until you get a line scan. So generally you'd work from a line scan backwards. With this, the first line scan was the day after. So the initial observations, hence why Lewis Turner was taken back to the scene. Something that we generally do, and it gives you a fairly good indicator of where the fire was first observed.
Because fire investigators have to start somewhere.
We generally work backwards, yes. So the further backwards we can go, the easier it is to, or the quicker it is to work out what's happened.
All right. You've referred to Scott Hart and his RFS team turning up to the scene of the fire, and he provided, didn't he, some photographs showing the ground cover at the site where his brigade started work?
These photos are pretty important.
I'm going to ask for one of those photos to come up again onto the screen. This is from page 29 of the brief. Now, although that caption is obscured for people watching at home, Detective, can you just confirm the date and time on which this photo was likely taken?
It's 1:46 on the 26th of the 11th.
Okay. And you told Her Honour that these photos were really important. Why is that?
It just shows the amount of fuel load on the ground, not necessarily above the ground, it's below the ground, because one of the RFS fellas, Edward, I think his name was talking about how even when they put it out, it would reignite. It just showed that's because of the amount of fuel load that was in the area.
And reigniting on from the ground.
Yeah, and it's also important that, you know, that within this one we've got GPS coordinates too, that we're able to say this wasn't burnt at that particular time. So when we're going backwards, finding a place of origin, we use these particular images to work out where and what was burnt as well. So.
Now, you've already given some evidence this morning about the utility of fire mapping and line scans. I'm now going to ask for the fire map that's contained at page 35 of the brief to come up on the screen. And again, Detective, for people watching on outside of the courtroom, can you confirm the date and time for this map?
Yeah, this map is dated 1:19 p.m. on the 26th of the 11th.
All right. And what does this show us?
It shows a fire running left to right or west to east across the North Black Range fire trail in general east direction.
We can see the North Black Range fire trail working its way through the map.
That's correct.
And is the area of origin marked on the far left-hand side of the red dotted outline with a black icon? Might have a star within it.
That would have been the original area of origin,
Yep.
which is given by the first attending crews, where they obviously for this they've gone up the Black Range trail. They would have got to the fire and they would have given the IMT coordinates to that particular spot, so hence why it's right beside the trail.
Okay. And that's an estimate provided by the first responding crews, whereas a later cause and origin investigation might provide a more refined or even a different point of origin.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's not too far different though in this case. So.
And does this first map show that the fire has also crossed to the western side of the trail?
That's correct.
To a small degree?
Yes.
Okay. Is it at this point still burning within the national park?
Certainly is.
And this map collated at 1:19 p.m. on the 26th is at a time when we know local residents had not yet made any calls to O reporting the presence of smoke in the area. Can we draw any conclusions from that, given the RFS first attenders were talking about some erratic winds at the site and evident fuel at ground level causing the fire to reignite as they attempted to put it out, and yet at the same time we don't have local residents yet alerted to the presence of the fire?
It was deep into the national park.
And I suppose when I say local residents, we're not talking about a suburban area with people living close by.
No.
All right, now, as I mentioned in the opening this morning, whilst the North Black Range fire was burning west of Braidwood, there were other fires between Braidwood and closer to the coast.
That's correct.
And you've referred this morning already to the presence, I think you said, of Charlie's Forest?
Well, it was Currawin at that stage.
What was in fact one fire but was given a separate name of Charlie's Forest when it crossed LGA boundaries. Okay. Could we have page 43 brought back up on screen, please? Detective, can you... Oh no, we can see it on screen. This is a line scan, isn't it? Taken on the 27th of November 2019 at 17:52.
That's correct.
And again, it shows, does it not, the North Black Range fire relative to the Currawin fire.
That's correct.
And the portion of the Currawin fire that later took on the name of Charlie's Forest.
This is a little bit before that, but
Okay.
yeah, you can see in this photo how the Currawin, or the line scan I should say, the Currawin fire is burning in a general north-northwest.
Yes.
Under southeasterly winds.
Yes.
And then Black Range is burning the opposite direction from a northwesterly wind heading southeast.
And even the non-experts amongst us might think we can conclude that by the patterns and the brightness of the burning that's demonstrated on the fringes of those fires. Is that right?
That's correct. There's two determining factors, would be wind and slope for those things.
And is Braidwood one of the shadows that we can see virtually in between those two fires?
Right in the centre.
Currawin by this time is already much bigger than the North Black Range fire.
That's correct, and it's already spotted to the southeast.
Being the small separate fire that we can see within that red circle.
That's correct.
I'm actually going to ask you to go to a different page that I haven't prepared for. Could we please bring up on screen, please, page 42? Right. Detective, you had said earlier that there is a distinction in the detail provided between fire mapping and line scans like this. Can you explain to the court how the data used in a line scan is actually obtained?
So it's heat signature from a certain height above a fire. So you can see in this that the extremities of the fire are obviously burning a new fuel load, so the heat is higher. The heel of the fire, or what I term the heel of the fire, which is the northwestern side, looks like it's out. That's either done by the graders that attended early on using the North Black Range Trail. But yeah, you can see that it's running towards the southeast by the smoke column that's above it, or southeast I should say, and it's predominantly under a northwesterly wind.
Right, so the smoke column is the plume in pale blue that we can see moving across to the right-hand side of the screen, is that right?
That's correct.
And clearly the fire outline given by this line scan is much less uniform than the fire outline that's showed in the fire mapping.
That's correct.
But this would be a more reliable indicator because this technology is showing the actual fire.
That's correct.
Thank you. Detective, I now want to just come to the evidence about the dates on which this fire was actually declared out. Some of the documents within the brief refer to the fire being out by the 23rd of December 2019.
That's correct.
But is it your evidence that it in fact burnt until a later date?
That's correct.
And it in fact continued into the new year, did it not?
Until the 28th of January.
Okay. And is it the case that that earlier date of 23 December 2019 has been included in some documents just as a result of administrative error when the fire was inadvertently merged with another fire?
That's correct.
Now, you've already referred this morning to the fire progression map and it's showing the spread of the fire towards Braidwood. Could I ask for page 120 of the brief to now be displayed on the screen? Detective, is that the map that you were referring to earlier in your evidence?
That's correct.
And does that map show the finger of the fire extending out towards the southwest of the Braidwood township?
Yes, that's correct.
Detective, in the course of preparing the coronial brief, did you obtain a cause and origin report that had been prepared by Rural Fire Service wildfire investigator Stephen May?
That's correct.
And similarly, a report from Senior Crime Scene Officer Mark Holland of New South Wales Police?
Yes, I did.
They each hypothesised that the fire was caused by lightning strike. Do you have any reason to disagree with that hypothesis?
I don't.
In the course of your investigation, did you find evidence to support any other potential causes for this fire? All right, could you please turn up page 72 of your statement? In terms of lightning strikes, did you yourself obtain some data from the Rural Fire Service with latitude and longitude readings for lightning strikes and map that data onto some pre-existing maps?
Yes, I did.
And did you thereby establish a particular lightning strike as the most likely cause for this fire? And what time was that lightning strike?
9:46 p.m. on the 25th of the 11th.
And that's the details that we see in paragraph 81, amended by your earlier evidence this morning, where we add an hour.
That's correct.
Why did you go to the extent of mapping that lightning strike data for yourself?
Just to confirm to myself, basically.
Your Honour, those are my questions for the detective.
Thank you. Let's see if there's any other questions. Mr. Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Detective.
Your Honour, the next two witnesses will be called concurrently. It will be Mr. Hollands and Mr. May. But given the technical difficulties we've had at times, I'm just checking, do we think we'll be right to go? All right, we might proceed.
Okay.
So I call firstly Mark Jeffrey Ackland Hollands and Stephen James May.
Mr. May and Mr. Hollands, can you see and hear us?
Your Honour.
I can, Your Honour.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now. Thank you.
Mr. Holland, would you like to take the religious oath or the affirmation?
The oath, please.
Thank you. Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. May, would you like to take the oath or the affirmation?
The affirmation, please.
Thank you. Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Dealing firstly with Mr. Hollands, would you state your name, occupation and professional address?
My name is Mark Jeffrey Ackland Hollands. I'm a senior crime scene investigator, and my professional address is Wollongong Crime Scene Section, care of the Forensic and Technical Services Command, New South Wales Police.
Thank you. And Mr. May, would you state your full name, occupation and professional address?
Stephen James May, authorised wildfire investigator for the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, working out of the Southwest Slope Zone Harden Office.
Thank you. Now, Mr. May, did you prepare a statement on the 22nd of September 2020 annexing your fire investigation report into this fire?
I did.
And was that completed after you firstly participated in a flyover of the fire scene on the 5th of December 2019?
That's correct.
Then you conducted your first site inspection on the 16th of December 2019, is that right?
That is correct.
And you returned on the 19th of that month to complete that inspection?
That's correct.
All right. Mr. Hollands, did you complete a statement on the 4th of September 2020 setting out your cause and origin investigation into this fire?
Yes, I did. It was signed later than that, but that was
So it was signed on the 11th of February 2021.
That's correct.
And that followed a site inspection that you conducted on the 25th of February 2020, is that right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Hollands, do you accept that Mr. May has an advantage in his cause and origin investigation by reason of the fact he was just able to attend the scene and inspect it closer to the time of ignition?
Definitely, due to it's a limiting factor. My attendance was some time after Mr. May's.
And your attendance was only some time after Mr. May's because it was only allocated to you for investigation sometime after Mr. May's, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
In other words, there was no delay on the part of police in getting out to the scene?
No, not in relation to that.
While I'm asking you some questions then, Mr. Hollands, could you please turn to page 90 of the brief of evidence? And you see there you've included a table of where you've marked weather changes for the 25th and 26th of November.
Yes, that's correct.
We understand the hypothesis is that the fire commenced on the 25th of November as a result of lightning strike. If we just confine our review to the first two entries in that table for the 25th, is there anything in there in terms of wind speed or wind gusts that allows you to interpret the way that the wind might have affected the fire in those first early stages?
Fire development is reliant on wind, topography, and fuel load. If we have winds that are substantial and then gusting to quite significant speeds, it's going to affect fire development.
Do you think wind gusts in the vicinity of 32 kilometres an hour or 29 kilometres an hour, represent unusual or extraordinary wind gusts?
If there was with a fire burning, I think it would significantly impact the rate the fire burned.
Right. If the wind gusts were being experienced at the scene of the fire?
That's correct, yes.
Because these are observations taken from Braidwood, aren't they?
That's correct. It's the Bureau of Meteorology data from the Braidwood weather terminal.
All right. If we then look at the readings for the wind gusts recorded for the day, afternoon and evening of the 26th of December 2019, they increase significantly in comparison to the previous day. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
And in terms of the likely impact of wind speed and wind gusts on early attempts to contain the fire, is there any data in that table that you think that is particularly relevant to those early attempts to contain or suppress?
I think the consistent wind speeds being up to 50 kilometres an hour with gusting as we go into the afternoon and the evening of 63 kilometres an hour and then up to 100 kilometres an hour to be significant affect the fire behaviour.
So likely impact on attempts to try and contain it?
Oh, most definitely.
Mr. May, do you want to comment on the interpretation of the data contained in that table?
No, it is relevant.
Could I now ask you, Mr. May, to turn to page 126 of the brief? And do you see there your fire investigation report, wildfire?
Yes.
I'm just going to ask you some questions arising from the things you say in that report. Firstly, you tell the court that you were able to conduct an aerial review in Firebird 242 before any attempt to inspect the likely area of origin. What did you learn from that flyover about a suspected area of origin for the first fire?
I was able to observe a V pattern heading in a southeasterly direction from the eastern side of the fire trail. And at the apex of the V pattern where one would normally be able to locate an origin, there was also a fire from the fire trail heading in an easterly direction that met up with that V pattern, and the V pattern headed southeast.
All right, so those V patterns that you were able to observe from the air, did they give you enough data to have a general area of origin where you could start your investigation on the ground,
Yes, they did.
but not too much more detail than that. Is that right?
The canopy was very dense. I had even trouble picking up the actual fire trail. So to pick up a specific area of origin was impossible.
Your report refers, though, also to the second fire that commenced within the national park, we believe, on the 28th of November 2019. Is that right?
That is correct.
How did you know, as at the time of the flight in Firebird 242, that there was likely a second ignition within the park?
When I had my brief from the Fire Control Centre, they informed me that Air Ops had observed another ignition at 15:52 on the 28th of the 11th, and he had plotted a grid reference to that location.
So you had some information to help you fix on a likely area of origin for a second ignition. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then during the course of the aerial review, were you able to determine a point of origin for that second ignition?
Yes.
How did you do that?
From the aerial platform and the grid reference obtained from Air Ops, the indicators on the ground of a lightning strike were compelling.
And visible to you even from the air?
Correct.
Did those two fires with separate ignition points within the national park merge during the course of the fire? Do you know?
Yes.
They did merge?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, just in terms of the area of origin for the second fire, I'm going to ask for a photo within the brief at page 191 to come up on screen. Now, Mr. Mayor, I don't expect that this is being displayed in court with anything like the resolution that would be necessary for you to be able to fully talk us through what you saw from the air. But can you do your best to explain to the court what it is that you observed in this establishment photo 1 for the second fire?
What we're looking at from the centre of the screen down to the right-hand corner and left side of the screen is a V pattern, which is primarily influenced by strong winds or steep slope or both. And the area of ignition is often located within that apex of that V pattern. And the round ball at the back of that is where the fire actually backed up to the slope.
So and your theory is that the point of origin is most likely within the apex of the V pattern.
Yeah, it was actually to the right of the V pattern as we're looking at it.
If we can then go to page 195. And again, I don't expect that we'll be able to see this clearly in court, Mr. May, but can you explain to the court what we are looking at here in what you describe as indicator photo 3, and in particular showing charring on tree limbs, top centre of the photo?
The top centre of the photo is a tree that has been hit by, it's very difficult, yeah, a tree that has been hit by a larger tree, which the stump is actually in the top left-hand corner underneath the shadow. The charring that I could observe was at the base of that tree on fractured branch limbs. At the base of the tree, which is the left corner of that photo, also showed deep blood red lightning tracking down it. And underneath that tree was also a large tree that had showed long-term smouldering.
The blood red lightning tracking that you've just referred to, is that what's described as a lightning trail?
Lightning trail and scarring, yes.
And seeing that lightning trail and scarring along with charring on the limbs allowed you to form, well, fed into your conclusion, did it, that this was the likely point of origin?
Yes, and at the base of that tree left-hand corner, which is in the shadow, and from the long-term smouldering log, the directional vector indicators, which were very clear because that ground is really inaccessible, it has large boulders in it. The
Yes.
directional vector indicators of sooting, protection, and the angular char on the other trees surrounding it had a fire radiating out from that base of that tree.
Okay, so it's not the mere existence of the lightning data, nor the presence of a tree that seems to be obviously affected by lightning. It is also the fact that the indicators around that site point to it being the point of origin for the second ignition. Is that a fair summary?
That's a fair summary. And the lightning plot data for that fire was 600 metres from this location.
All right, what does that tell you?
That's not unusual. I've had confirmed lightning strikes up to 3 kilometres away. It's because of the steep terrain. The computer prediction of where a lightning may hit the ground was out in this case.
The computer prediction is just a prediction, and it's one thing that you take into account in reaching your conclusion about point of origin. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Okay. Coming back then to the things that you were able to observe when you conducted an investigation on the ground within the national park, you say in your fire investigation report you walked the fire ground in the general area of origin and you used macro and micro indicators to lead you back to a potential area of origin. Could you just explain in general terms what you observed to lead you back to that potential area?
We have 11 indicators we look for. So we look for protection, angular char on trees, sooting, staining, curling, leaf freeze. Most of those indicators were there. But since this fire had actually run over the top of itself, I was mainly relying on surface indicators of charring, protection, sooting, staining, and white ash to follow those indicators back to a specific area of origin.
And as you followed those indicators back to a specific area of origin, what did you find at that site?
I found a large disturbance to the soil with large clods that have been propelled out from a lightning strike.
All right, we'll turn to some photos of that disturbance of the natural earth in a moment. But is this a fair summary of your evidence? I'll withdraw that. Is this a fair summary of what you did for this fire? You don't attend the general area of origin and look around for a potential lightning strike and then work backwards from that point. Rather, you attend a general area of origin and you use the macro and, if possible, micro indicators to point you towards a likely point of origin.
That is correct. The lightning strike for this particular area was actually 1.2 kilometres away, and I hadn't enlarged the lightning strike. I just knew lightning was in the area.
Okay, thank you.
I let the directional vector indicators lead me back to the specific area of origin.
Yes. I'm going to ask you to now have a look at the photo at page 186 of the brief, and that's going to come up on the screen. Mr. May, can you explain to us what we're looking at here?
That is the stirred soil through a disruptive shock wave that was caused by lightning. If the surface around that disturbance The ground is weathered. However, the soil that was propelled out of that mound is more of a natural earth looking colour, which indicates it was a recent occurrence.
Okay. So the different colours allow you to draw that conclusion. Is that right?
Yes.
And are these clumps of sandy soil rather than rocks that we are looking at in the photo, or is it a mixture of both?
It's mostly clumps of what I believe was a loamy clay.
Loamy clay, thank you. Towards the mid-top of the photo, it seems like these lumps of loamy clay have piled up one on top of the other. Is that what it looked like at the scene?
No, I think it's an optical illusion of the photo.
All right, thank you. You say in the caption to the photo that there was a hole visible at the scene.
That is correct. I took a number of photos of that scene. That was one of them. I took a side photo, that large fallen timber to your top right-hand corner.
Yes.
That had also been disturbed by a shockwave. And then I took a photo of the actual blowhole.
All right, we might come to that in a moment. How do you know that that tree in the top right-hand corner was disturbed by an electrical interference?
By a shockwave.
Shockwave.
Are we permissible to bring up page 187?
Yes, we can go to that now if that would assist. What can we see there?
Yep, that is a photo. I'm now facing west with the large fallen timber on the western side of the soil disturbance. The right-hand side of that photo where the trunk is actually hitting the ground, that trunk had been lifted up and there's a natural, and it's gone back to the natural earth colour. So that when the trunk has hit the ground, it has made a deeper hole, and the area around it was weathered except for underneath that, whereas they gone back to a natural earth colour, telling me that was a disturbance to that area.
All right. Does this photo better display the hole that you observed with signs of a root system present?
There's one root system sticking up. I was unable to tell if there was actually a small stump there originally, or that root system's out of the many trees that are surrounding that hole.
I see. So if that's a root system, we don't know what tree it belonged to. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. You say there were signs of a root system within the hole, however, no indication of a tree had fallen from this location. You're there excluding the presence of the trunk in the top right of the photo?
No, that on the left-hand side of that trunk, that is the ball of that tree, and that is actually still secured to another mound.
Okay. So do you have an hypothesis as to whether the lightning strike here has grounded straight into the earth or has grounded through a tree?
It is not uncommon for a dead tree that was struck by lightning to actually disintegrate, but you normally find fragments of that tree within the general area of origin. And in this case, the general area of origin was about 50 by 50. The only fractured timber I could find that was fractured inside any sort of charn is just to the right of that mound.
Yes.
And it's just a small stump. So it might have been there or laying on top of the ground as the lightning struck.
Okay. And is that the small stump visible to the right-hand side middle of this photo?
Correct.
So is it the case, we're not sure whether the lightning strike discharged directly into the ground or via a small tree that may have been on the site?
That is correct.
But that really doesn't matter in terms of your view as to this being a likely point of origin, is that right?
That's correct.
I'm just going to ask for page 188, so the next photo in the series to be brought up. And could you just explain to us what we're looking at here, Mr. May?
That's a reasonably large blowhole caused by electrical resistance, which is indicative of a lightning strike. And the directional vector indicators had a fire radiating out in all directions from this ignition area.
The fact that those indicators were radiating out in all directions from this spot points to this being the point of origin. Is that right?
Correct.
Independent of whether or not there's also evidence of lightning effect.
Correct.
Is the small stump of a tree that may or may not have been hit by lightning and that you referred to in relation to the photo at 187 visible in this photo?
Yes, bottom left-hand corner.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, if I could bring you in here. By the time that you attended at the scene, you tell the court that you could observe macro fire indicators, but micro fire indicators were no longer available. Is that right?
That's correct. There were the larger scale indicators I was able to see,
Yes.
but the minor ones, the more fragile ones, which time and weather affect, I was unable to see any of those.
Okay. Did you observe during your inspection a disturbance of the natural earth as displayed in these photos from Mr. May?
There was one area, but nothing. I was unable to find what Mr. May has photographed there.
All right, thank you. I'm now going to ask for page, I think it's 196, to come up on the screen. Mr. May, this is taken from your report. Could you explain to the court what we're looking at here?
North Black Range is running virtually bottom to top of that page. There's a circle with an X through it, which is a confirmed point of origin symbol with a grid reference.
And is that your grid reference and your conclusion as to the point of origin?
Yeah, that reference was taken from my GPS.
Okay, thank you. And does that suggest that the point of origin was actually relatively close to the North Black Range fire trail itself?
It was approximately 8 metres east of North Black Range.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask for page 197 of the brief to be brought up in court. Mr. May, can you explain to us what we're looking at on this page?
The circle on the North Black Range was where the fire was first observed by Field Officer Lewis Turner.
Yes.
To the right of that is a circle with lightning. That was at 2146, and that is approximately 1.2 kilometres from the point of origin. And the point of origin is also within that circle on North Black Range.
All right, so the circle on this map on the trail is actually based on Lewis Turner's evidence as to where he thought the fire was when first visible to him. Is that right?
Yeah, when Mr. Lewis Turner arrived on scene at about 12:30 hours, the fire was 50 metres to the west of the trail, and approximately 100 metres to the right of the trail, and approximately 400 metres long.
Okay.
I put that circle as in the middle of the area observed by him.
And then the point of origin grid references that you determined for yourself during the course of your investigation fall within that circle as marked on this chart in any event?
Correct.
Okay. I'm now going to ask for the document at page 116 of the brief to be brought up. Mr. Hollands, this is taken from your report.
Yes.
And although you were unable to determine a point of origin, were you able to determine a possible broader area of origin?
Yes, I came up with the conclusion of the area of origin was within the area as described by the National Parks and Wildlife Field Officer.
Okay. And then you've produced this chart. Can you just explain to Her Honour what this lightning strike data chart shows?
This is a series of 4 images. The one on the left is a broader area which defines some lightning strike data which has been plotted. The blue line is the GPS track I took to conduct this examination, and
Yes.
the plotting points are, if Your Honour can see, there's written AOO, being area of origin, on the left-hand side in the near the lightning strike symbol. The middle image is a closer version, closer cropped of that same image, and the right 2 images as a satellite and then a mapping version of the area of origin as closer described.
Is this a fair interpretation of this map? Mr. Hollands, you establish a possible area of origin that is also proximate to the area in which Lewis Turner indicated the fire was when he first located it.
That's correct. That was indicators pushed back towards an area which I've got a broad area of origin, could be hundreds of meters in relation to that, and a point is a single
Yes.
definitive area on the ground. So I just wanted to define that. So my general area was my indicators pushed back to that area, but I was unable to find the specific point of ignition.
Okay. I'll now have page 120 from the brief brought up on the screens. And Mr. May, this demonstrates, doesn't it, the reach of the North Black Range Pallaran fire through until whatever date, I find it hard to read on the copy I have, Your Honour, through until whatever date in early January is the last plotted in colour on the map. Firstly, if I understood that correctly.
That is correct.
And were you present for the earlier evidence from Detective Senior Constable Ben Waldron as to the fact that the fire itself didn't reach the Braidwood Township?
No, I wasn't. I didn't watch that.
Okay. Did you, during the course of your cause and origin investigation, have any need to drive around the country around Braidwood, the township itself?
Yeah, I pass through Braidwood quite often in my investigation travels.
Detective Senior Constable Waldron gave evidence this morning that one of the factors that might have led to the fact that Braidwood was spared fire in town was because the farmland between the fire edge and the township had been drought affected and there was relatively little fuel left on the ground. Are you able to give any observation or make any comment on that based on your own observations?
That would be a correct statement. To contain the fire within the range itself would have been extremely difficult. Where once fire has got onto the flat ground, at least it can be attacked by fire appliances, and with the lower vegetation, it was much easier to control.
Your Honour, those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr Newton, do you have any questions for either gentleman?
No questions, Your Honour.
Right, thanks very much, Mr May and Mr Hollands. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material in the brief of evidence that has been tendered. So that's both Exhibits 18 and 23A. And you've heard this morning the oral testimony of Detective Senior Constable Ben Waldron, Senior Crime Scene Officer Mark Hollands and RFS Fire Investigator Stephen May. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the likely cause and origin of the North Black Range Pallaran fire. But in that regard, I can foreshadow today, formal submissions are likely to be made that the cause of the North Black Range Pallaran fire was lightning strike on the 25th of November 2019 at approximately 9:46 p.m, and the origin of the fire was within the Talaganda National Park in an area near the North Black Range Fire Trail. So, Your Honour, in terms of the North Black Range fire, all that's left to do today is for Your Honour to formally stand the matter over to the 5th of September 2022. I will now tender a brief of evidence that will become Exhibit 24 in the proceedings, and it is just comprised of the supplementary photos and videos that we have played in court this week for the hearings into the Mid-Southern Region fires. Your Honour, I can now then close the evidence for the Mid-Southern Region cause and origin hearings and invite Your Honour to consider adjourning these proceedings to a directions hearing at 10 a.m. on the 22nd of October 2021 at Lidcombe, but also with AVL available. The directions hearing on that day, Your Honour, will relate only to the Northern Region inquests and inquiries which are listed for hearing in the Northern Region of the state in February and March 2022, COVID permitting. Now, parties involved in those proceedings will shortly be given details about the directions hearing. Some of them will have heard about it for the first time today, but that's because the matter's we've only just made these arrangements. So the directions hearing on the 22nd of October, if convenient to the court, will be limited to the Northern Region inquests and inquiries listed for hearing in February and March of next year.
Thank you, Ms Ward. I'll stand over the North Black Range Pallaran fire inquiries to the 5th of September 2022. I will adjourn these proceedings to 10 a.m. for a directions hearing on the 22nd of October 2021, and that directions hearing will be dealing with the Northern Region inquests and inquiries only.
May it please the court.
Unless there's anything else, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Right.